My mother lied to my stepfather. She also prevented him from living with us by telling him that she considered his sick mother a burden. I am currently a 16-year-old high school girl. 2 years ago, my mother married my stepfather, John. At that time, my mother was 40 and John was 42. My biological parents were not married. I am the child of a brief romantic relationship that my mother had just after she graduated from college. They thought their relationship would soon end, but my mother became pregnant and decided not to have an abortion but to give birth to me. My father also wanted to be actively involved in my life, so my parents chose to share custody. This has made it a routine for me to go back and forth between my parents' homes every month, a pattern that has repeated every year. My parents have taken great care to ensure that I spend equal time with both of them. As a result, I have been able to feel loved and grow up well in both homes without favoring one parent over the other. I am truly grateful that my mother and father consider my happiness and emotional stability their top priority and are doing their best for me. I am especially grateful that my parents chose to live in the same city for my sake. This decision has allowed me to move between my parents' homes without unnecessary travel time or stress, enabling me to lead a smooth daily life. However, I recently learned that my parents have given up their dreams and possibilities many times. They chose to live close to each other to cherish the environment in which I was growing up, and as a result, they compromised their careers. My mother also turned down relationships with men who were interested in her, choosing to spend all her time and effort on my growth rather than getting married and building a family. She chose not to balance work and family life, but to devote herself entirely to raising me. I learned about all these sacrifices because of my stepfather, John. He is not an ideal stepfather, and my mother had to reveal all these stories just so I would accept John. If my mother has sacrificed so much for me, I thought I should reciprocate by accepting John. However, there is a part that does not sit well with me. That's because I have never once asked my mother to sacrifice anything for me. She could have easily chosen to have an abortion, or she could have completely entrusted me to my father. Even though I have had many frustrations inside, I have never felt rebellious towards my mother. That's because I love my mother deeply and sincerely wish for her happiness. That's why I was able to decide to accept John. No matter what kind of person John might be, I felt it necessary to respect my mother's choice and build a relationship with him. John is definitely not a kind person. However, this does not mean that he has treated me terribly. He has not shown direct malice towards me but has openly expressed his dislike for me. I don't understand why a 42-year-old man would have issues with a 16-year-old girl, but there is no doubt that he has some problems. I do not remember doing anything to anger him. Still, I have no idea why he dislikes me. Rather, I have always been polite and kind to him as much as possible. I was raised to be compassionate towards everyone, so even if he showed his dislike through his behavior, I approached him with compassion. But John has never insulted me or spoken ill of me. Instead, he has completely ignored me and acted as if I do not exist as part of the family. This situation has already lasted for 3 years. I have no clue what I did to make him upset, but one day he suddenly stopped talking to me and started acting as if I didn't exist. This behavior is very strange, and I have never encountered such an attitude before, leaving me very puzzled. It feels like he is treating me coldly for some reason, but I have no idea what it could be. Therefore, without knowing what his dissatisfaction is, I cannot even begin to change my actions. Even when I consulted my mother, she just said, "That's his personality." She explained that he doesn't have any hostility towards me, but he doesn't particularly like me either. However, I believe that there should be some reason to dislike someone, especially when the one who does so is a 42-year-old adult, and the one being disliked is a 16-year-old child. Perhaps the fact that I am my mother's first child has something to do with it. I really don't know, but it is clear that he has not liked me from the beginning, and that was evident from the start. Initially, We were getting along reasonably well. When he first started coming to our house, John talked to me a few times, asking about my life. I responded politely to him. However, at some point he suddenly decided to stop talking to me. The change was very abrupt, and I had no idea why it happened. Initially, I thought he simply forgot to greet me, so I didn't think much of it or worry about it. But as it happened repeatedly, it became harder to overlook, and I eventually asked my mother if I had done something to upset him. He continued to act as if I didn't exist, deliberately turning his face away whenever I entered the living room or the room he was in. My mother did not give me a clear answer. She simply said, "He's just trying to get used to having you around all the time." She also explained, he's never dated a woman with children before, so he might be struggling to adapt to that situation. But I couldn't easily believe her words. This is because I knew that John had 2 sons, aged 15 and 12, who lost their mother in an accident right after their younger brother was born. In fact, it wasn't true that I was always at home. As I mentioned before, I lived at my father's house every month. Yet this situation continued for several months, and after a year of strange distance, I came to understand that this was just his personality and accepted that he would no longer talk to me. A few months after he proposed to my mother and they got married, John moved in with his sons to my mother's house. This was despite the fact that I had only met his children a few times before they moved in. Surprisingly, they were also told by their father not to talk to me. This situation was truly abnormal, and I don't know how I managed to endure it for years. Before the marriage, John and my mother lived separately. This was because John's mother was seriously ill and living in his house. However, after the marriage, John decided to move his mother to his sister's house. His sister took over caring for their mother. Afterward, John moved in with his children to our house. I don't know if anyone else has had a similar experience, but living under the same roof with people who don't talk to me at all and ignore my existence was unbearably painful. Yet, I had no choice but to accept this situation. Seeing their behavior towards me and my family made me feel like a criminal who had done something wrong, and it deeply saddened me. The hardest part was not knowing what I had done wrong. I still don't know the reason, but fortunately I no longer live with him, so I don't need to worry about it anymore. Their attitude remained unchanged, and it stayed that way. Gradually, I got used to the environment. Every time John came to visit my mother, the fact that he didn't say a word to me became the norm. After they married and he and his children moved in, I got used to being treated the same way whenever I visited my mother's house. Every time I had to mentally prepare myself to only talk to my mother for a month. She was the only one in that house who talked to me, while the others acted as if I didn't exist. It was a difficult situation, but I had to endure it because I wanted to spend time with my mother and knew she had no intention of discussing this issue with John. I repeatedly asked her to convey this problem to John and try to uncover the truth or find a solution. However, she told me that she had already talked to John about it. She had personal reasons she couldn't share with me, and I knew these were why he didn't accept me. She understood the situation and knew I was concerned about it, but without her telling me the reason, there was nothing I could do. In the end, all I could do was endure and accept it. If I argued with her and insisted on my own views, she would become emotional and accuse me of being ungrateful and ignoring her sacrifices. Therefore, I thought the best way to handle it was to forgive John for the way he treated me and endure it for her sake. I really wanted to confront my mother and ask for the reasons, but my desire not to hurt her feelings was stronger. I had never talked to my father about this. If he knew, I thought he would become very angry and blame my mother. They are people with completely different viewpoints, and they had completely different opinions on how to raise me, so they often argued and clashed over trivial matters. But if my father found out about such a big problem, I thought he would try to take full custody or take even more drastic action. I didn't want to increase any more conflicts between them, so I didn't tell my father anything and pretended that my relationship with my mother and her new family was going well. My mother and John had lived together for a year before they got married, and it has been 2 years since the marriage, so I have been enduring this situation for 3 years. However, I recently reached my limit with this situation and was mentally and physically exhausted. I felt cornered and could no longer endure it. Last month, when I went to my mother's house, John and his children ignored me as usual. At that time, I was also having trouble with my school friends and was feeling very mentally unstable. 2 weeks ago, I noticed the house was completely silent one morning, and I felt utterly helpless. Everything had been normal the night before. Everyone was having their own conversations at home, and I felt ignored, but no one had mentioned any plans to go out. However, when I woke up the next morning and realized that there was no one else at home, I immediately called my mother to check. I was completely confused about the situation, but fortunately, my mother answered the phone. When I asked what she was doing, she told me that she had gone on a 1-week short trip with John and the kids and wanted me to stay at home. I thought it was strange that I, who had no school during summer vacation and no need to go anywhere, was left alone at home to monitor the house's safety. I was not satisfied with that arrangement and told my mother that I could not stay at home all day. If she wanted me to do so, we could simply enhance the home's security. I was also upset that they had left without telling me about their plans. They left me alone at home without giving me any time to accept the situation. Being a high school student, they probably thought I would just say yes and prefer to be home alone. I could have invited friends over and had a few days of fun, but I was just too upset to feel like doing anything. I was deeply hurt by how poorly my mother treated me. At that time, I was also fighting with my friends, so I couldn't invite anyone over, and it was the worst situation in every aspect. I told my mother that I wanted a proper apology for what she had done. I understand that John does not want to talk to me, but at the very least, they should have done the minimum before leaving. Waking up one morning to find the house eerily silent and then being told by my mother to stay at home was not a pleasant experience. Moreover, she told me that I should just get over this situation. She hung up the phone before I could respond. Even when I called back, she did not answer, and she texted me that she would call me when they arrived at the hotel because they were enjoying the trip. I was so upset that I decided to leave the house. I knew no one would be home, but I couldn't care less. I tried to call my mother to tell her I was leaving, but she didn't answer, and it immediately went to voicemail. So I locked the house and placed the keys under the pot as my mother usually does when she goes out. Then, I headed to my father's house and decided to live with him for a while. When I arrived at my father's house, he was surprised that I had returned so early. That's because I was supposed to spend the rest of the month with my mother, so he thought I wouldn't be back for another week. But I had reached my limit, so I decided to return to my father's. I told him everything that had happened. I told him about John, his very unpleasant attitude towards me, and how he had told his children not to talk to me. I felt like I had done something wrong, but I couldn't even understand what that feeling was. I was just frustrated. I told my father that my mother had no intention of discussing this issue with John and how she had remained silent, no matter how much I was hurt. I thought my father should know how my mother was treating me, thinking maybe he could improve the situation. I couldn't bear my mother's treatment any longer. I had not done anything to hurt anyone, and had always treated everyone with kindness and compassion. But I also told my father that my mother had left with her husband and children without saying a word and left me alone at home. After finishing the story, tears streamed down my face. I hadn't realized how much it had weighed on my heart these past few years. Everything had changed since my mother started dating John, even though I had been spending time normally with her before that. Everything was different from before, and I felt like I was of no importance to my mother, which was really hard to accept. What was strange afterward was that my mother made no attempt to contact me. She could have at least contacted her daughter, who was left alone at home while she was on a trip with her new family, but she did not do that. I was deeply hurt by her actions, but after confiding everything to my father, I felt a little relieved and decided to stop worrying about them. There was no contact for the next 5 days. Finally, when my mother called, I told her I was with my father and planned to leave the house. My mother yelled at me, but I honestly expressed my dissatisfaction with how she had treated me. However, she argued that if the phone was not connecting, I should have sent a text message instead. Her point made sense, but I was too angry to feel like sending a text message. And I simply followed my feelings and argued back that it wasn't my responsibility that my mother hadn't contacted me for days. I felt it was extremely unfair that John's attitude was the same as my mother's, trying to blame everything on me. And when he spoke to me for the first time in years, all he did was yell at me and criticize my actions. I was very confused by what he said. For example, he seemed to have always thought that I was the cause of breaking up his family, but I had no idea what he meant by that. We had hardly interacted, so I didn't understand how he could think I was a nuisance to his family. The reason I left my mother's house and started living with my father was that my mother and stepfather left for a family trip without telling me, leaving me alone at home. 2 weeks after I left home, various things came to light. Firstly, the reason John had been ignoring me finally became clear. Apparently, when they started dating, my mother told John that I didn't want to live with him. My mother felt burdened living with his sick mother, so instead of being honest with him, she used me as a shield. This happened about 3 months after their relationship began, which was probably too soon for such a conversation, even if it was a serious relationship. However, that was my mother's responsibility, and there is nothing for me to say about her lying to John and saying she loved him. My mother had told John that I had been saying various things about his family and would make his mother suffer. Specifically, she told him that I said his mother was a burden to the family and that I would make her suffer if she lived with us. However, I would never say such a thing, and I know very well how inappropriate that would be. Moreover, my mother told him that I called his children little nuisances who say nothing, and they lived separately until they got married. It became clear that John had treated me horribly because of the lies my mother told him. My mother couldn't tell him the truth that it was she, not I, who opposed living with his sick mother. In his email, he said that if my mother had told him the truth, there would have been no problems with our relationship. But in the end, it is a fact that I was ignored by him for a long time, and my mother allowed it. In fact, my mother had been feeding him all sorts of lies, including that I was continuously causing problems at school, and John had no reason to doubt those lies. He fully believed her, and since we never had a proper conversation, he didn't realize that I was actually a normal woman. Thus, the truth about my mother was never revealed. My mother is a very self-centered person, and because she can't live without us, I thought I had to do something about this situation. Considering what she has done, it infuriates me that she tries to make us believe her unconditionally. I cannot forgive her for overlooking how badly I was treated over the years. Moreover, I heard that she lied to John about me. I sincerely hope that no one else has to suffer as much from their own mother as I have. I have often wondered what is wrong with me and why my mother's husband and his family ignore me. Currently, there are discussions about whether my mother will divorce John, involving some of our family and my parents' friends. My mother is responding to this situation in a very strange way, posting sad posts on social media. My cousin sends me what she posts. I don't know what she expects, but I hardly think it will resolve anything. My mother has caused problems and now finds herself having to continue lying about them. As a result, my father has full custody of me, and friends have distanced themselves. Months have passed, and my mother seems to be enduring somehow. I live with my father and am leading a happy life. I am also glad that I have reconciled with my friends,